Well, welcome back. We're finally getting to the E4od Rebuild on this thing, and if you remember, we did the whole tear down in a whole different video, did the whole trans in one video, and what I decided to do is split this rebuild up into about 4 videos. I figured if I do one long video, it's going to be over 2 hours and put people to sleep, so let's not do that. So today, the first step in the rebuild process, I have this thing all cleaned up. It's ready to rebuild, which I've already started the process. But today's video is basically going to be rebuilding the entire gear train in this E4od and the heavy duty upgrades I do to it and all the things I do to it to expect to get 100,000 miles or more out of this actual rebuild. So that's the whole point of the video today. And I'm gonna, like I say, I'm gonna do probably 4 videos on the whole rebuild because I don't want to leave anything out. Anybody out there is trying to do this, you should be able to rebuild an E4od transmission after you get done watching this 4-step process to rebuilding this entire trans. And I don't want to leave anything out. So we're gonna start today with the gear train, go through the gear train, and the next video will be the clutch packs, all the clutch packs in it. And then the third video most likely will be the pump and valve body, all the hydraulic circuits in it. And then the 4th video will be assembling the whole transmission. So stick around, we're gonna get to it. And I'm pretty sure you'll learn something today. So. All right, so at this point, we have the whole transmission cleaned up. It's all on the bench, laid out, a lot of parts here. It is what it is. But all I do when I go to rebuild a trans, I just think about one part at a time. And that makes it a lot simpler when you're rebuilding an entire automatic transmission. But what I like to do is I usually build my gear train first, and then build my clutches, my clutch packs, and then I go to the pump. A lot of builders are kind of finicky. They have their own method, and that doesn't matter. Whatever you prefer is best for you. Some people like to go through the pump first, and then the clutch pack second, and then the gear train third. But I like to build the trans in my mind as I'm building it in the unit. And the first thing to go into it is a gear train part. So we're gonna start with the gear train. And if you come over here, the first thing to go into the case is the sprag race. This is a new one, and this is the old one. And if you look at it close, it's got some chatter marks in it where the roller clutch rides. So that's getting a new sprag race. So that gets bolted in the case. That's the first thing that goes back down in the case, other than a low reverse clutch, but we'll get into that later. And then we got that and the low drum and the rear roller clutch. If you look at these, I got a new one and an old one. That's a new one. And this is an old one. It's got a few burn marks in it, a couple chatter marks from the race. But these are all wear parts that if you don't change, well, will they go 100,000 plus? Every transmission I rebuild, no matter what, I expect it to get 100,000 miles or more. And these are the wear things that you got to change if you expect your transmission to last that long. So we're getting rid of the sprag race, the old one, and the roller clutch assembly. Putting new stuff in. And if you look at this real close, this has ramps on it. It's got little ramps. And that's what happens when the roller clutch locks. It ramps up against those ramps and locks it. And then when it has to be free and spin, it just ramps back down. And I've already checked the splines on this thing. Already checked the ramps. Everything's good with this drum. So all I do is take my roller clutch, put it down in the drum. And the springs have to push against the ramp. Take my new race and roll it against the rollers. And then when this is locked to the case, and all it has to do is spin clockwise. So this is inspected and good to go. Got my new race, got my new roller clutch. That's all ready to go. Back up. And then the next thing to go in, because all I'm doing is building this thing from the case, sprag race up. That's all I'm gonna do with this transmission. Never mind all those parts, I'm just worried about the one part that I'm working on. So I've got the sprag race, the roller clutch, the rear drum. Next thing is the rear hub. Now this is very important. If you come in close, that splines into there. When I rebuild a trans, I take this out. I do it on every one, but if you don't take that out, that's splined into there. You take it out, and dirt, if this thing has been blown up and a lot of clutch material and metal's been run through it, dirt will be hiding down in those splines. Guaranteed. So you have to take this out. I do it on every one. This transmission was not that bad, but I do it anyway. Take it out. You just take your wire brush and you just wire brush all that dirt out, and you guaranteed you get a bunch of dirt out of there. Even if it hasn't been blown up, you'll get dirt out of there. So took that out, cleaned it up, checked my splines, and then you got your snap ring. Got your snap ring here. And that snap ring just goes in there. And when you put snap rings in, you got to make sure they're seated good. That snapped, I heard a good snap there. But I also take my pick. Where's my pick? Take my pick and just force it in there. Make sure it's nice and seated. So I've checked my splines, cleaned out the dirt, ring gear's good. Check my splines in there, and I actually took 600 sandpaper and cleaned where the thrust washer rides, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But that hub, gear, snap ring, everything's happy. Now, when you go to these bearings, there's always a thrust bearing or a thrust washer between every moving part. So if you go down here and you look at these, this is my pile of bearings that go in this transmission. They're all different. There's a bunch of different ones, but bearings will only go in one place. So I know this, but if I were to try to put this small bearing on here, obviously it won't fit. So take this bearing. This is the bearing that goes on it, and it goes on right here. And if you look at that, that's the right way to do it. If you were to put this in backwards, you can see how it's rocking. There's a lip on this bearing right there, and it'll only go one way. That's nice and smooth. Opposite, no good. You'll lose your end play and your trans and everything else. So that's when you go to check your end play, you'll know if a bearing is upside down because you won't have any end play. That took up 120 thousandths of end play. So put my bearing in there. That's happy. So all I'm doing is building this thing from the ground up, I guess you could call it. But that's good. Down in there, thrust washer surface is happy. And then just gonna keep going. Now we get to the rear planet. This is an aluminum rear planet. It's a 4-pinion, so it is heavy duty. Non-heavy duty, like a regular gas engine, would be 3 pinions. But I check the gear wobble, check them on all of them. You have to check every one of them. Check the gears themselves for any wear, any terrible wear. And if this thing had been blown up, you got to make sure that those gears aren't completely scored up. Because scored gears, even though they look good, they'll create noise if a lot of metal's been run through there, even though the planet's in good shape. So everything's happy there. And Ford transmissions, they don't seem to have any problems with the rear planet on them, just like the C4s. But this thing is good to go, no issues. And then this has actual thrust washers, not thrust bearings on this planet. And if you look at these, here, these are the old ones that come out of it. They're all the Babbitt. This is a brand new one. This is an old one. All the Babbitt surface on it has been worn off. Now, would this washer work? Yes, it would. But probably another 10,000 miles, that thing's going to start creating a bunch of metal. So they needed to be replaced. Now, with this Babbitt bushing, I take brand new, or Babbitt thrust washer. I take a brand new thrust washer, and if you look at it close, I took some 600 sandpaper and just sanded around and kind of did a pre-break-in on it, because any metal that's going to come off of that in your brand new rebuild is going to go right to the pan. And if somebody pulls the pan, they're going to be seeing metal in your pan and say, man, there's metal in my brand new transmission. Well, that was just break-in metal. So I actually take a little 600 and just kind of wipe off the excess there. And it's kind of a pre-break-in thrust washer. So it will create very little metal. So all I'll do is put some little trans lube. You got to use trans lube and use it sparingly, because this messes with your end play when you're trying to set it up. But you just put a little bit on there, just enough to stick it on there. And put my planet in there. Whoop. I guess I need a little more. It's all good. Put a little bit more on there. The minimal, the better, just to make it stick. Just get that in there. That's happy. Then I take my other thrust washer. Put a little lube on it. Just a little bit. Doesn't need a whole lot. And stick that down on there. So I got my rear drum, my rear ring gear, and my rear planet and thrust washers. Everything's happy, good to go. And all I'm going to do is keep moving on. So the next thing is I got the sun gear and shell goes on next. But this sun shell I had to change. Here's the old one. If you remember when we were tearing it down, it had these lugs that were kind of hammered out on the direct drum. And again, would that work? Yep, that would have went right back in there and worked, and it would have been slamming around, but that needs to be changed. So we got a brand new one. Got a new one. It's got perfect lugs here. But this, so we got a new sun shell. This is the old sun gear, and it's got a thrust washer. That's what rides against this here. And I took some 600 sandpaper and sanded that down. And I had this sun gear out. I had this all apart, but all it is the thrust washer and the snap ring. And then you got your old sun gear, but I put new bushings in this. These bushings right here. These bushings were rocking. If you remember on the teardown, these bushings were rocking. And if you don't change the bushings, all this sun gear, or this sun gear here is in the trans. When it's shifting and running, that thing is just rocking like that. And you can imagine how much that'll wear your gears out. So we got new bushings. Sun gear's happy, checked all the gears. We got a new sun shell. Everything's put together. It's all good to go. So that's the next step. And when I build transmissions, I like to spin stuff. For some reason, I just like to spin stuff. Make sure everything's good, nice and free. There's no crunching, anything like that going on. Do that all the time, constant. Anytime I put something together, I just spin it. It's just fun too, I don't know. Okay, So we got the sun shell, sun gear, bushings, all is good to go. The next part that goes in is this front planet. Now this front planet is the planet that I upgraded. Talked about it on the teardown. But this is a steel planet. It's got the 6 pinions and the steel carrier, super strong. This is a diesel. This is an actual diesel front planet. This is the one that come out of it. It's aluminum housing. It's got 4 pinions, and you can see the difference in the strength that this would have as opposed to this one. But I was surprised to see an aluminum 4 pinion come out of the diesel in a 97, but that's one of the upgrades I'm doing. This thing is right and tight, very nice planet. So that's the next part that goes in. And if you look here, between the sun gear and the planet is a bearing or a thrust washer, but this takes a bearing. So I go back over to my bearings, and I know which one it is, but there's only one that'll fit, and this is the one. And there's actually 2 of these in there, but this is the bearing that goes in there. And I've checked all my bearings, they're nice and smooth, and that bearing just drops right down in there. And then put my planet on. And all I'm doing is building this thing up from the top, or from the back. So the next thing is front hub. This is kind of important. We got, if you look at this, we got, check my gears. Now this front hub here, this surface right here has to be super, basically perfect, because now it's steel on steel. It's not aluminum on steel, because that up in there, it rides right inside there. There's no bushing in there. So if that has any score marks in it, steel on steel doesn't wear as good as aluminum on steel. For some reason, that's just how it is. But always make sure when you have steel on steel, planet to hub, that surface is perfect, which this actually is a new hub. It came with the planet set, so there's no issues there. That thing is perfect, good to go. And I did the same thing here, where I took the snap ring out, took the hub out, and I cleaned that with a wire brush on the inside. And there was a little bit of dirt. This thing wasn't bad, but when they're blown up and metal and clutch material all run through it, that thing will be packed inside there. And all that does is when you put new fluid with detergents in it, it just washes that dirt right into your brand new transmission. And when that dirt gets to the wrong place, that's when the brand new transmission problems start. It'll get in a valve body and stick a valve, and your brand new transmission isn't working right just because you didn't clean the dirt out. So everything's right and tight with that thing. We're good to go. And this actually takes a bearing, and there's only one bearing here. This thing it's a monster bearing. None of these other ones will fit. You try to fit something else on there, it wouldn't work. But this is your bearing, and it's the same thing. It's got a lip here. It'll only go one way. If you put it upside down, it literally doesn't fit. So all you got to do is put it the right way. Nice and smooth. Stick your planet in. All this is good to go. Put that down on there. And at this point, we got one more thing, but this whole rear gear train, that's the entire direct drive gear train of this thing, is good to go. But there's a thrust washer that goes on here. This takes a thrust washer. This is the one that goes on it. Now this thrust washer, if you look at this thing, it flexes just fine. But I'm gonna replace this. I don't have it yet, but I'm gonna get it tomorrow. If you look real close at this thing, if you look real close, there's a pocket right here that holds oil. It's meant to hold oil. There's 3 pockets. But if you look at the back of it, it's got like a crack right there. kind of difficult to see, but it's got a little crack on it. And the fact that it's flexing just fine is no problem. That's what I like to see, because anytime I can use a plastic thrust washer, I will use it in a non-super heavy duty application, because they do not make metal. Anytime that I can use one of these, I'll use it just for that reason. But the fact that it's got a little crack right where that fluid pocket is on the back, I'm gonna change that, because not sure if it's gonna go 100,000 miles or not. Okay, so we have the entire rear gear train. This is the direct drive part of the gear train, and that's all built, ready to go in there, other than that thrust washer. So at this point, I still like to do my gear train, and this is the overdrive part of the gear train, which is a lot more simpler than that, but still all that more important. So again, I got my overdrive hub, checking my gears, checking my splines. Everything's right and tight, no problem. But this goes down in here. And again, this is another place where dirt hides. So you just take it apart, put it in the washer, clean out all the dirt. And that way you can put it together and know that you're not getting dirt running through your brand new transmission. And this is gonna fight me a little bit. Nice and tight. Now we just have 2 snap rings, and there's just 2 different snap rings. Snap rings will only go in one place too. As you can see, that's too big. It's gonna stretch too much. So just get my snap ring in there. And again, if you look at this close, it's not seated all the way. You just gotta push it in the groove. Whoop. Push it down in the groove, make sure it's seated good. It's that simple, but it's that important. So I got that locked in. Checked my splines already. Everything looks right and tight. It's all good. And then just building the overdrive planetary. This is the overdrive planet. This actually came with a steel planet. The original ones came with lumens when they all busted out, every one of them. But this actually had a steel planet. This thing's in perfect shape. There's no gear wobble, no end play. A little bit of end play, but it's perfect. The gears look good, splines look good. And again, you got a planet and you got a piece of metal, and there has to be some kind of thrust implement in between them, either a bearing or a washer. And go back to your bearings. We're getting down to a lot less bearings now, and this is the only bearing that will fit on here. And if I were to put it this way, it's rocking all over the place. So it'll only go one way. That thing goes on there perfect, doesn't rock around, nice and smooth. So that bearing. And pre-lube is absolutely essential. So when you're putting the trans together, I'm gonna lube this up when I start building it, putting it in the trans, but this is gonna stay all together. So I'm gonna put some, just put a little trans fluid right in the bearing. You never wanna start a transmission up with a dry bearing, because that dry bearing will create flat spots. Never want that. But that thing's good and happy. All you got to do is put it down in your overdrive gear, spin it, make sure everything's nice and smooth. There's another bearing down in here. Another thing I'd like to note is checking bearings. I can't get this bearing out of here because it's trapped by those gears. Another way to check these bearings is find my overdrive sun gear. Here it is. You can put this gear down in here where it normally rides and push down real hard. Push and feel for any kind of jankiness or I don't know what you call it, but you can understand what I'm saying. It feels nice and smooth when I'm pushing down. I'm not feeling any crunchiness with that bearing there. So important. That's the only way you can really check these. You can feel it with your hand too, your fingers. Just make sure that's nice and smooth. There's no issues. That bearing's perfectly fine. But it's a good way to check those bearings with this sun gear and putting force on it. So we got our bearing on there. Everything's good to go. Put that down in there. And then with every part, we got our sprag assembly here. Every part that is moving against each other has to have a thrust bearing or a washer. So this is the thrust washer that goes on there. So I'm just gonna set it on there. Again, this is plastic, it's not metal. Perfectly fine, 120,000 miles on it. Nice and flexible. Go right back in. It's good for another 200,000, as long as this thing doesn't overheat. And then you got your sprag assembly, your roller clutch assembly, I should say. Spins one way, locks the other. Spins one way, locks the other. I replaced this roller clutch because it's not in terrible shape. Would it go in the truck and work? Yes. Would it last 100,000 miles? Not positive. If you can look at these rollers real close, they got some burn marks on it, some scuff marks. So we went ahead and put a new sprag in there. So that's good to go. Got rid of that. Put a nice new one in there. And all it is put it down in there. And then you got your snap ring. Snap ring that wouldn't fit on the other side because it was too big. And that just goes right in the groove. One thing I like to do with these snap rings is just stretch them a little bit. Stretch them like that, stretch them like that. Both sides, and then the whole thing, make it a little bit bigger so it expands and there's no chance of it coming out. A little bit. You don't want to distort the snap ring, you just want to stretch it a little bit. Pop it in, that thing's good to go. So now, at this point, we have our whole overdrive section built, good to go. That thing's ready to go in a trans. Everything's working, spinning stuff again. I just keep playing with stuff and everything works out. And the entire rear gear train. That's the entire gear train for this whole transmission. And it's good to go. Okay, this is kind of the tip of the day. I just would like to talk about snap rings because there's so many snap rings in a transmission. Every transmission has at least 20 snap rings, if not more. But this is something I've never seen talked about. And the reason you can fight snap rings, and this can be very frustrating, and I do it too. I literally can spend 5 minutes on one snap ring in a transmission as opposed to popping it out the first time. And the reason behind it is, if you look at this this picture here, this is kind of a layman's picture of what a snap ring looks like if you look at the end of it. So if we look at a couple snap rings here, this snap ring here, if you look at it close, it's got that edge to it that you see in this picture here. And every snap ring you come across will have the same thing. This is a real thin one, but if you look at it close, it's got the same thing going on. Every snap ring will have that. Some will be more pronounced, some will be more square, but all snap rings have that problem. And when I rebuild a transmission, and I don't know, when they put them together from the factory, they just put them together wherever they want to, or whichever way, upside down or right side up. But when I rebuild a transmission, I always look at those snap rings and I put the bevel side up. Heaven forbids I have to pull my transmission back apart, but if I do, I know I'm going to be able to get the snap rings easy that time. But when you fight a snap ring, the reason behind it is, I'm going to take this output shaft for example, and it's way down in the case here. When you go to take the snap ring out, you got your hand down in there, you can barely see it, and you're trying to pull that snap ring out. And if it's in the wrong way, what happens is you got your snap ring pliers and you're going down, say that snap ring's on that shaft right there in that groove. You're going down and you're trying to get that snap ring out and you kind of catch it. You don't quite catch the bottom edge of it and you expand it. That's fine, it's expanded, but when you go to pull it out, all it does is slip off that ramp and that snap ring pops right back in the groove. If that makes sense. So if it's the other way on this shaft, when you go to grip that, you catch the edge of it, it expands and you can pull it and it's tight in there and it grips the snap ring pliers and it pulls right out. That's why you can spend 5 minutes trying to pull a snap ring out, because it just gets off that ramp and it just snaps right back in the groove. But if it's the right way, it just pops right out. You can spend 5 minutes on one snap ring, or you can spend one time and pull it right out, and that's the reason. But what I do when it is in backwards, and I try basically 3 times, and then I know the snap ring's in backwards. So what I do is I take and expand my snap ring pliers and I go to the back of the snap ring. So basically I'm expanding it and pushing down, and I go to the back of the snap ring and pull the back of the snap ring up over the teeth, and then I just kind of work it out, and it usually comes right out at that point. But it's a cool thing to know, because rebuilding transmissions, there can be a lot of frustrating things going on, but that is one cool tip that anybody out there may have struggled with, and that's the reason behind it. And all you got to do is look at your snap ring and figure out which way it goes. So another cool tip. Hope you learned something today, and we're going to get to the next phase of this rebuild. The next video is going to be the clutch packs, and I got a lot of cool stuff to share about that. I got a neat story with that, Honda clutches and back in the day kind of thing, but it's all neat stuff. And just check out my next video, and check out all my other videos. They're pretty cool. There's always something good in these videos. So we'll talk to you soon, and take care. Thanks for watching.